refreshing tea break. Let's continue with our next interesting session. Clinical research is the key to the discovery of latest diagnostic methods and developments of modern drugs for the treatment of diseases. Good clinical practices is an ethical and scientific quality standard for designing, conducting, and recording trials that involve the participation of human subjects. It covers all the aspects of clinical trials from the initiation to the completion. Adherence to the good clinical practices ensures that the rights, safety, and well-being of the participants in clinical trials are taken care of. They are the sine qua non for high-quality clinical research. We would now request Dr. Arun Bhatt, sir, consultant in clinical research, Mumbai. He is the qualified assessor for NABH accreditation for clinical trials and ethics committee. Sir previously worked as a medical director at Novartis Hospital, India, and a chief executive officer at CMI, Center for Medical Innovations India Private Limited. Sir was a president at Clininvent Research Private Limited and has completed his MD in medicine from the Mumbai University. He is a fellow of the Indian College of Physicians, India, and a fellow of Institute of Clinical Research, UK. Sir has secured various awards like the International Center for the Study of Radicalization Special Award for Notable Contribution to the Clinical Research Fraternity 2017, Award of the prestigious Professor Yogesh Oration 2013, Drug Information Association Outstanding Service Award 2012. It is our honor to have you here with us, sir. We invite you onto the stage to begin with the session.
So the AC for the slides. Okay, right. Good morning. I'm sorry I'm crashed into the program because of the crash on the Pune-Mumbai highway, and we literally were diverted to multiple places, but still we could reach SYMPOSIUM, so I'm very happy that I'm here now. Just a small correction that ICSR is a wrong term in my CV. I'm not part of any radical society. It's actually ISCR, Indian Society for Clinical Research. So please bear with me because I don't know what will happen to me if somebody did radicalization there. So it's not my cup of tea. Let's come to the topic of good practice in clinical trials. I'm sure you have heard the definition from the anchor, and that sums up everything. But very often I think when Dr. Moindon is here, we look back and wonder what is this GCP about? How did it start? What's the origin? Now let's go back to origin of the world. And the story about Adam and Eve. You all know that. Now every country in the world wants to own Adam and Eve because they're the first human beings. So it starts with British. They say Adam and Eve are British because they had excellent manners. They were doing pehle aap, offering the apple to each other. The French said, no, they are not British. They are French. They were the first ones to make love. And who but French know how to make love? But we Indians jump into everything. They are neither British nor French. They are Indians. Born with poverty, one apple between two of them. And height is our colleagues from China. They may be British, French, or Indian, but they are not Chinese. So instead of eating the snake, they had the apple. Now this story, to my mind, is more like an experiment which God did with Adam and Eve. And said, do not eat apple. So that's God's clinical practice. Now we have a choice. Here, if you see, that what is between the GOD depends on us. Could be 0 or could be O. So it's up to us whether we abide or not. So that's where the challenge is for us in India. Otherwise, I think all of you will be able to understand what we are talking right now in this field. The definition was definitely very well read out by your colleague. But the challenge is of what? It's a standard. Now, if you have worked in this field, you know that standards keep on changing. So, my friend Manju is here. We started way back in 2000. When we started, the standard was this. Today it's this. The standard has changed. So that's the first challenge of GCP, that standards are going to change as you learn more and more and more. And what does it cover? Actually, it covers everything. Design, conduct, monitoring, audit, everything. So frankly, very often, no, when I was running a company, people would say, we have got the protocol approved, HSMT approval, why don't you do a GCP trial? And I would say your protocol is not GCP compliant. So they forget that without a protocol which is GCP compliant, you can't have a clinical trial which is GCP compliant. So that's the challenge, that GCP starts from the beginning. Like a train, it starts on the engine and ends in the guard. You can't suddenly make the in-between dabbas like Vande Bharat. No, Vande Bharat starts in the beginning. And why are we doing this? To assure that these studies are implemented in a reported manner, that there is public assurance. The public assurance is something very loaded word. We don't put everything in kind of newspapers. But all clinical trials today are registered in a registry of ICMR and internationally. So there is some information available on trials in the registry. So that's public assurance. Second is ethics committees will approve the protocol. And they are in a way in public in some way. DCGI, the drug controller, approves the protocol. So there is some kind of public assurance that people have looked at your studies which are compliant for two purposes. One is data are credible, accurate, data integrity. And the second one is more important in country like ours. Rights, integrity, conscience of subjects are protected. So second is more important in a country like ours, that we have to ensure the rights of people are protected. When we say our country, people sitting here are probably not the people who are affected much, but an average person in BJ Medical College who takes part in a trial is what we have to worry about. So this is the challenge for us in India, and the challenge has remained for over the years. Think globally, we can't say we don't want GCP, but panic internally. Because you can ask colleagues in the industry that how is the setup of hospitals in India about documentation. And that's the heart of clinical research. We still have a challenge there. So you have to act locally. Now locally solutions are not much now because we have to move with the global times. So how do you comply with these practices? In simple terms, wherever you are part of clinical research, ensure data integrity. It's very small, two phrases, two words. It starts with documenting the right way to confirming the documentation in the audit. And the second one is more important, human protection, the ethical aspect, the consent, etc. If you look at it, this is not what has happened overnight. You would be wondering that when did GCP come and why did we suddenly jump into this? Even today my friends who are doctors don't know what is GCP. 2 days ago I put down a book published by Dr. Deo from Pune on research studies for students. And I have a chapter on GCP. So I put the chapter there. They asked me, what is GCP? Then I clarified that GCP means good clinical practice, but for research. So if you see here, I think this one, okay, there's a mode, I think, there's some problem. Okay, no, I can see. 96 is when the GCP was first time released by ICH. That's the body which is called International Council of Harmonization, a European body. And we all assume that GCP has arrived today. But if you look at the history of GCP, it goes much before that. It almost starts with 1947. You might be aware of Nuremberg Code, and I'm sure you would have seen a lot of movies about the atrocities during World War II. If you have not seen the movies, please see Schindler's List to understand what happened, a book and the movie. So Nuremberg Code was a kind of a special court set up to punish the guilty in those who did experiments on Jews without any ethical balance and approval. So if you look at it that way, it's a 50-year evolution. In between, there are other important landmark documents. Declaration of Helsinki is actually a guidance for doctors. When a practicing doctor does research, what he should be responsible for. Primarily, his patients. And the third one is the Belmont Report in USA. And it's again an outcome of a 5-year review after a very big scandal of what they call against the African Americans. It happened in 1940s, called Tuskegee trials. You might have heard of this in ethical reviews. It's a small document, but it's worth reading. So frankly, it's a 50-year evolution of the guideline. In our own country, it started with ICMR guidelines, which are now modified. Then you have Indian GCP guidelines, modeled on ICH GCP, but some differences. The regulations changed 2005, which included the GCP as a legal document. Then we also have GCP for our friends in Ayurveda. 2013 was a big watershed because there was a case, a PIL in Supreme Court against clinical trials. It's still going on, but that led to government making a lot of changes. And those changes have now become finally a part of new drug rules. I'm sure Dr. Manju will talk about it more in detail because she is the expert on that. So that's the way it has moved. And see what has happened. Even these guidelines, ICH, have been amended in 2016, 20 years later. And ICMR itself has made guidelines, ethical guidelines, which are again amended in COVID. So if you are a student today of clinical research, this is your basic syllabus to start with, minimum. If you don't know this, you can't do clinical research. And that's why I always remember a story which my teacher, Dr. Golwal, used to tell us. He was talking about gout. Gout is a painful disorder of joints. And the drug is colchicine for that. So when you give colchicine to gout, one will tell you that colchicine causes diarrhea. That's the biggest side effect of colchicine. So he would tell us, Dr. Golwala, when you give colchicine to a patient of gout, he has to run because of diarrhea before he can walk because the pain is there. So actually, whenever I see this, we are in that scenario as students, researchers, that we have to start running before we can walk. This is the reference to that medical guideline for medical doctors. When they do research, even there, the first thing is duty is to protect their patients. What? Life, health, dignity, integrity, autonomy, privacy, all that. Second is for vulnerable subjects, special protection. I know you are a bit vulnerable now because lunch is 1 hour away, but that's not the meaning of vulnerable here. People who can't take decisions on their own for their own medical treatment or research are vulnerable. And finally, any doctor saying that, oh, but I'm in India, I can't do anything, it's not possible. It's very clear that none of your local guidelines can overrule any of the international guidelines. So if you're a doctor doing research, you have to ensure that you follow this declaration. The other one, Belmont Report, which I told you is the American document, almost now 40 years since it's made, a very small document, but that's a document which first time brought out the most important principles of research which we talk today. Autonomy, beneficence, non-malfeasance, and justice. So when you look at applying this to research, autonomy is actually for the people who are taking part in research, the participants, to respect their autonomy. And largely, we talk about that in consent situation. Beneficence, when you do something, any trial, any therapy, there should be some benefit to the person. Now, this is a difficult situation in some areas. For example, in COVID times, I don't think we followed this in toto because we were looking for newer and newer drugs. So we kind of took anything which came our way. But if you can't at least do benefit, try not to hurt people, no? So no malfeasance. And finally, justice. Another challenge in India, because what happens? Clinical trials of new drugs are done in people who are going to public hospitals, mostly poor, maybe not very much educated. But when the drugs come out, which are quite expensive, even we can't afford, they are used by people who are maybe affluent. So you look at the problem of justice. Who takes part in research? Somebody poor. Who benefits? Somebody else. This again is a very major challenge, and every time we look at the trial, we have to balance this scenario. So what is this GCP coming about now? ICH is it's a council on harmonization. But it's not just GCP. Technical requirements for registration. So whatever you want to do in the field of drug development, making a new drug, maybe a new vaccine, all the documentation for regulatory purpose is part of this ICH. It's not just GCP. There are topics on safety, quality, efficacy, and multi-disciplinary learning. Now, safety largely talks about the animal studies we do before going to human beings. Quality obviously is all pervasive, but largely on the manufacturing side. And efficacy has multiple guidelines. One of these is what we call GCP guideline, E6. There are so many efficacy guidelines. I'm just showing you to tell you that you can't talk about GCP without knowing about other guidelines around it. For example, safety. If you ask Dr. Moindon, he will give you full one-day seminar only on E2. And even that would be inadequate. Right, sir? Yeah. Statistics is here, control groups, and they've added some more now. There's some more coming up gradually. Okay? See, all there more. But one thing which is glaring, which you can't see from there is no E13 guideline. This is not there. I've yet to see. Somehow it looks like the Europeans are more superstitious compared to us. We don't have a problem with 13, but they seem to be doing that. This is not there. And some new things which you might have learned, adaptive trials are all here. So it's the list is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's like what to do is all here, but how to do is GCP. So what about India? Let's go about ICH. When do we apply ICH guidelines? By and large, they are for industry. When you want to develop a new drug therapy, want to get approvals from the regulatory agencies, we have to ensure that we follow them. But the principles of clinical research there, the ethical principles, are applicable across the board. So they are advising that whenever you do even academic studies as doctors, they are worth applying. And today, by and large, that's what we do. Even for other studies, the same principles are into picture. Indian GCP, actually, we are very fond of, our national food is khichdi. So we always prepare a khichdi of whatever is available. So we have started with WHO, ICH, FDA, European. Actually, there is nothing FDA or European, but we have just put in our document to show that we have taken so many things in our consideration. Okay. And ICMR. Again, to be followed for all stages of drug development, right from phase 1 to 4, and getting approvals. But this is the way Indian GCP has kind of balanced the reality. It's like a melting pot. What has happened is that we have ICMR guidelines, we have GCP guidelines from ICH, we have borrowed things from different places. For example, the science and ethics of new therapy, etc., ICMR guidelines cover beautifully. You should look at the latest guidelines, which cover a very vast gamut of subjects, which are not there in the other things. While ICH talks more about responsibilities, conduct, and documentation. So we have taken from these two sides and made our own guideline. Some principles of GCP, because they are the most important, because practices are from the principles. This is the first chapter of GCP. The first is balance of risk and benefit. This is the theme of clinical research. You must balance benefit and risk for the participant. What are the important things? Right, safety, confidentiality of the subjects, and well-being. So when you are doing a study, all people who are responsible, the sponsor, the company, the investigator, the doctor, the ethics committee, they all have to guard and ensure that the person taking part is really protected. Ethics committee approval is a must. Freely given informed consent. The consent has to be freely given, so voluntary. That's why a lot of documentation is required about the transaction between the doctor and patient. And now we even have audio-visual consent recording in India. We want to document the whole process. Then person doing trial should be qualified physician. This is very important now, that you must keep the records confidential. Coming further, the product which we are going to use in a trial, it's called investigation product or IP. There should be enough information available on that product for us to do a trial. Basically, data on its safety in animals, the chemistry, the potential side effects, etc., before you go to human beings. Okay? The protocol should be scientifically sound. I say GCP has a full section on what should be in the protocol. And similarly, it is a full section on what should be the information on this IP. Competence. This is another important thing, that anybody doing a trial at any place should be qualified by education, training, and experience. So the investigator whom we select, it's not just he is a doctor. Is he qualified to do that particular study? Is he experienced and is he trained? These three are important. And then his team is trained or not. This is the heart of GCP. We say what is documented is done, what is not documented is not done. So if you don't document what you have done, and this is where, as a country, we are very poor. You go to any hospital and look at the documentation, even the best of them, you might find some data on patients' salary, income, and the bills, but not much on what happened to the patient. Because we require this to find out its accurate reporting, interpretation, and verification, and quality. Everything that we do in GCP has to meet quality standards, so we require SOPs. I'm sure you must be aware of this term, SOP. So what happens to people like me who are on the other side of 25? We have to upgrade our brain to learn the new discipline. And fortunately, so far my brain is catching up with what you people can do and think. So it starts with who should be responsible, who has to follow the practices. There are 4 stakeholders. You might have heard of this word: sponsor, usually a company, but could be also an institution or organization. For example, Symbiosis can do research, then they become sponsors. Second is the investigator, the medical person, the doctor. Third is the ethics committee. And the fourth person we don't see, but they are part of it, the regulators. They have to see that the GCP compliance is kind of adhered to. But the sponsor's role is not just to give money. See, responsibility is a buzzword. So anybody who is going to sponsor a trial has to be responsible for starting, managing, overseeing, and maybe also funding it. Now you might have heard of this word CRO, a organization which is a contractual research for them. So sponsor can transfer a part of their role to CRO, but it all should be in writing. So one more thought is that whatever we do in GCP is legally, contractually documented. Investigator, a doctor may want to do a research on his own. Then he wears 2 hats, one of sponsor, another of the investigator. No? But again, he does both, and he wears both the hats. But it's possible that the doctor is only doing a part of the trial and he is not a sponsor. Then I think he is the investigator responsible for the conduct of trial. So there will be a team of people, but the top person is the investigator, could be a qualified in whatever discipline. For example, there is a trial in, let's say, coronary angioplasty, it will be a cardiologist, could be oncologist, depends on their specialty. Ethics Committee is the local guardian for clinical research and for the participants. In fact, they are local regulators because Drugs Control's office is in Delhi. They can't be seen to be everywhere. So who can monitor GCP compliance and ethical compliance? The Ethics Committee. And look at the word, independent body. Yeah, okay. The word independence, I think, is a bit challenging because most of us don't understand independence without examples, but that's the word. Okay. I've been told I have only 5 minutes, so maybe I'll go a little faster to just show you what are the key things in slides. So frankly, just to tell you, trial is this trial. No? Starts with planning, protocol, approvals, monitoring, and start and end. It's like your Gantt chart or file, okay? I'll not run through all of them, but sponsor's main role is to ensure quality control in all the stages, okay? Documentation, very important role, selection of investigators. We can't make everybody investigator. The ones who are qualified, trained can be. But I'll go ahead. Investigator, I think, is the second person who is going to do the trial. So they should be aware of the whole protocol, the processes, and the compliances. Ethics Committee's role is very clear. If you remember this much, in every stage, before, during, after, to ensure right, safety, well-being, that's enough. I'll just skip all this because this is available for you. This is very important. During the trial, the sponsor has to monitor the trial to ensure that there is a compliance to very important two parts, data integrity and human protection. The two parts are most important. And second part is on the safety. I'm sure Moin will touch more on these issues. Okay. Again, investigators' role is largely on the compliance to protocol, GCP, documentation. Ethics Committee has to review an ongoing protocol for any changes, deviations, safety issues, but goal is to see that the patients who are in trial are protected. After the completion, largely role of the sponsor, analyze data, prepare reports, and get approvals. Okay, so I'll go ahead. This is an addendum to this GCP in 2016 where some things have been modified. So when you look at GCP, look at the current version, which is most relevant for any study. By and large, it talks about technical aspects, because a lot of things have changed in 20 years, and how do we use computer systems and electronic documents, and how do you ensure documentation during that process? Now, do we really comply with GCP all the time? That's the question you must be wondering. That it's such a beautiful thing. It's like paradise. But paradise is difficult to ensure. Now, we don't have inspections data coming from our own DCGI office, because they probably are doing it, but they don't tell us. US FDA, this is a Food and Drug Administration, which has been doing inspections of all trials world over, everywhere, wherever the trials are done for submission to US FDA. They've looked at 56 inspections in India. That means they go to hospitals and look at those who have done a clinical trial for US FDA, and then they give their findings. So there are three ways they look at findings. One is no action indicated, so about 62%. That means there were some minor errors, but nothing major, nothing serious. Second is voluntary action indicated, about 34%. So there are some deficiencies at the site. How significant they are depends on what they ultimately want you to do. But the site, the doctor has to improve the process of compliance. And the third one is the most serious, official action indicated. That means the doctor, the investigator at the site has done some misconduct or fraud, means the data are not acceptable. Now, which areas are where the problems are occurring in Indian setting, which is actually world over also? Documentation, availability of records is one of the biggest problems. Okay. Failure to obtain consent. Now, of course, not so much common, but this is one thing which comes up very often. If you don't take consent, you can't do a trial actually. Okay. drugs are given for trial purpose. You have to account for each and every sample, every tablet. Not following the protocol, a major deviation. Again, records. And finally, not notifying ethics committee of changes. So these are the areas where there are still problems. This is not just India problem, world over. But since we are new in the game, if we are not better than others, we cannot really get benefit of this. So ultimately, who is responsible for this? As I showed you, the rise of GCP requires regulators, investigators, sponsor ethics committee. All of them have to be involved. It can't be only the combination. And finally, why did we not do this in the right way? Because if you Google and look at the history of clinical research in India, a lot of ups and downs, court cases, allegations, media trials, everything is going on. Because what has happened is that by three methods we may learn wisdom. First, by reflection, which is noblest. We had the choice of creating our own GCP guidelines, or if we can't do it, we are, I think, the best copycats of the world. We can just imitate others and accept it. For example, if you look at Malaysia, small country, they don't have a GCP guideline of their own. They have the same guideline, ICGCP, with only one change, regulations as per Malaysian authorities, no other change. They just accept in toto. We have spent 3 years making a guideline, but we don't really follow it. And third, by experience, which is the bitterest. So when you Google, what you see is our bitter experience, that we have made mistakes and we have learned. But to tell you positively, we have come a long way. Today, I think when you say about GCP, in a good hospital, that culture is acceptable and established. So we don't have to really teach people what is GCP. So that's the last slide, and thank you for your patient hearing. I'm sure there may be some time for questions, and I'll answer.
Good morning, sir. Very nice session.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned the institutional ethics committee and independent ethics committee. Is there any difference between these two?
The difference is in where they are sitting. So if you say institutional, for example, symbiosis, if you have something inside, it's institutional. But there are committees which are not with any institution. They are what we call, they're called private IRBs in USA. But here we call it independent. While it's a wrong term, to my mind, it should be non-institutional and institutional. That should be the difference. Because independence is actually both have to be independent. You can't say that those who are inside are not independent. So ideally it should be institutional and non-institutional. So there are committees which are in private setting, which also review and give the approvals. Yes, sir.
And another question, you mentioned about the qualification and experience of research. For example, if suppose any doctor wanted to do some clinical trials with the nutrition products, so is that necessity that the principal investigator should be a doctor and a dietitian?
See, this nutritional area is actually directly not in the domain, because they come into more of things which are not regulated. So there may be a combination is required, But we go by the expertise in a disease area. For example, let's say you are doing study of nutrition and diabetes. Then you require a diabetologist and a nutritionist. So diabetologist will be the primary person responsible, because ultimately you are dealing with human beings. So that's the purpose. To make it more complex, let me tell you that, let's say oncology. But let's say I'm going to do a study in lymphoma. I can't go to any oncologist. I have to go to Dr. Sant, who is a hematology expert, who does lymphoma. So that's the subtle difference as you go further and further. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. In 1721, when Edward Jenner developed first vaccine, gradually it has become popular in 1918 post influenza pandemic. So nevertheless, we are moving forward with the next generation drugs and vaccines. It was speculated that vaccine would be the prospect of 20th century. Now as we are moving ahead, it has been speculated that cell therapy and gene therapy will be prospect of 21st century. And it differs case by case, patient to patient. It is not like COVID-19 vaccine which can be developed, undergoes clinical trials and can be used for mass immunization. So considering the criticality of time as well as it differs from patient to patient. What is your opinion? Will there be or is there any requirement for cell therapy and gene therapy to undergo clinical trials as well or not? Thank you.
I think the process of clinical trial and drug development, actually I think maybe Manju will tell you what is the reality, is that you cannot go to human beings without adequate data from in animals. Whether it's cell therapy, gene therapy, whatever therapy. See, COVID is an aberration. We bypass everything because there was an epidemic. But gene therapy, I would request you to read, because I am not a genetic expert, but I have read the guidelines, read ICMR guideline on gene therapy and cell therapy. There are enough issues of the cell therapy, gene therapy, which are difficult to even predict. If you give a chemical drug to a patient, I can predict what will happen. When I give genetic drug to a patient, I don't know what will happen. Will it be passed on to the next generation? Will it get to some cells? What will happen? So we don't know. There are examples of people developing cancer after gene therapy. So you can't totally bypass the need for clinical trials. And that is going to remain. Without a proper human trial, you cannot say that this therapy is effective. Even if somebody wants to do it faster, the only way is that you personally go to a doctor and ask them to do something. That's your personal choice and risk. But the moment industry comes into picture or a doctor comes into picture, wants to develop a therapy, we'll have to go through the the whole process of drug development. Now, whether we can make it shorter or faster depends a lot on multiple factors. So that's the challenge. That line vaccine, we could do it fast because it was all healthy people required. But let's say in gene therapy, we require people who are in rare condition. So which centers are doing, where they are doing. So, so there is a need for that. In countries like hemophilia or thalassemia, we require that. But how many centers are ready to recruit patients and do studies is a big challenge. So I would urge you to be patient. Even if you are in a rush to do something, be patient. Edward Jenner could do something because the times were different. Today we can't do it. Today we'll have to follow this kind of process of approvals. Now, can we make this faster and better? Yes. Okay. Okay. Any other question or my time is up?